Hello and welcome to something quite different. Now, I wasn't sure whether or not I was actually going to do a video specific to the Army Painters Warpaints Fanatic line, because there are quite a few of them on YouTube already. Folks are quite excitedly talking about them, but there have been a few questions to me directly about what I think of them. So rather than answer 30-odd comments individually, I figured, okay, I will put this together. It's not so much a painting guide as a review. I'll front load it. They're good. They are an improvement. That's the whole review. They're really good. Yeah, rather than doing the whole spiel on every single color, the improvements across the range are quite genuine. If you've watched another video where folks are talking about how much better they are, I have to say, in the main, that's accurate. So what I've got sitting in front of me are a bunch of miniatures that I have painted using just those colors. The fella in the front, the cowboy there, he was a fair bit of mixing. I did enjoy painting him, just spending a little bit of extra time. The Coastal Defense Trooper on the right-hand side, he was an experiment in basically painting as quickly as I could with the new range, and I'm quite pleased with that result. And the Valakor fella on the left, he was just having a bit of fun. Now, the Colonel back there you have seen before on the channel. Some of him is painted with the previous versions of the Warpaints because I didn't have the new ones. And I gotta say, I really like how they turned out. The paints themselves are nicer to use. It is the easiest way I can think to put it. They are a pretty good incremental improvement on all of the things that used to bother me a little about Army Painter. They didn't thin as easily with water, for example. One quick point of contention, and it's not necessarily a negative, but it is the one thing I could think of as a downside to the range, and that is if you thin them out with water to a large degree, you can't really use them like a glaze as you would, say, Citadel layers or Vallejo paints. They tend to just sort of separate in my experience so far. I haven't had a lot of luck with that. But in saying that, if I want to glaze, I'll normally go for, say, a shade, contrast, or speed paint and thin that out with a medium instead. So it's kind of, it's a non-issue, but it is something that I know folks do like to try, so worth mentioning all the same. But rather than just me blather here in front of a bunch of miniatures, I've got something to show you. Let's cut away to actually using them. So what I've got here, this is one of the fellas from the Valakor from the Maker's Cult. I've printed him out and I've primed him with necrotic flesh. It's a really nice primer, very light green, and it suits what I've got in mind down to the ground. Now, Army Painter does recommend using their primers with their paints. In my experience, you can use pretty much anything you like, but I have found that the slightly smooth finish you have on these primers is actually quite useful with the war paints, especially the Fanatic range. So bear that in mind. I don't think it's wholly unreasonable that a company would recommend their own primers with their paints. Citadel certainly does, and it's much of a much. If it works, it works. And I've used the Army Painter primers all the time. You see them on the channel pretty much constantly. Anyhow, let's get some paint on this dude. So I'm going to start out by adding a little bit of army green to his webbing, and let's see how this goes. That's probably not the best place to start to show you how these work. One of the first things I noticed when painting with these Fanatic paints is that the consistency of them straight from the pot is a little bit smoother. Oh, there's my thumb on the way. They are, I guess, a little bit more fluid, it feels like, in comparison to the OG recipe. I have still added just a tiny wee blip of water, and you can thin them down with water still, but you don't want to use very much. That resinous medium that they use, it does work better if you don't split it up, essentially. All right, let's try something which will look a little more impressive on the miniature. I have Ancient Stone. Now, I'm pretty sure this is a new color. It's a little bit below Brain Matter Beige in lightness, and look at that go on. I'm still going to come back and give it a second coat in some areas just to make sure that it is a solid color, but it just covers brilliantly. Really a nice color. And like I mentioned, the consistency is just more pleasant to paint with. It's a really hard one to try and quantify something like that for a review, but yeah, it's nice to paint. Now over his face and the leg wraps, that is 2 coats, but it's just 2 coats, and that is a super light color. Now leather brown here, this has always been one of my favorite colors. It is a brilliant primer to start with, but the bottled version sometimes had a little bit of problem with consistency, whereas this is just a tiny bit of water in some of the Fanatic version, and yeah, I think that's good. This is a vast improvement on what was already one of my favorite army painter paints, and that is, let's get him in shot, that is true of most of the range. So let's cover over his gloves here. Now that is a nice mid-tone brown in 1 coat, just brilliant. I could paint his boots in the same, but for variety's sake I'm going to use oak brown on those. And same thing again, just straight out of the pot that is. I actually haven't watered that down. So don't tell Duncan, but that suits me down to the ground. I'm loving how this stuff works. And one of the other neat things about the change in formula being slightly more fluid and the pre-mixed little mixing balls that come in them these days is that you can actually mix up an army painter paint now without needing a vortex mixer or something along those lines. Just a little bit of elbow grease and you get a nice smooth finish in your paints, all mixed in properly. That is another improvement. Now deep grey is a color I quite like. This is a little bit darker than Mechanicus standard grey. So I'm going to apply this to the tubing on his mask. And again, you see just how quick that goes on. Once this is dry, I'm going to take a quick look and see if it needs a second coat. So let's get a look at that actually. I'll cut to 1 coat. So there's 1 coat of grey. I don't think we're going to need a second. Alright, let's get some matte black. Now this hasn't changed much. It's black paint, coverage is still good. I'm just going to go over his gun with this. Oh, might have watered that down a bit much actually. Let's try that instead without so much water in it and see how that covers now. Ah yes, there we go. And then for his armor, let's get some angel green. I do wonder what angels they mean. There's a quick blast of this. And this covers much better than angel green used to. I am still going to just let it dry and see if it needs a second coat in much the same way, because dark greens in quite a few ranges, they tend to be a little bit finicky going on, but that doesn't look too streaky at all actually. Now, full disclosure, up across his helmet, the big flatter areas, I did give that a second coat. Turns out, dark greens, they tend to be a little finicky, like I thought, but honestly, 2 coats is not bad at all. Now, plate mail metal here, this is out and away my favorite of the changes because, gosh, this just works straight from the pot because I'm being naughty. And it covers beautifully. This is by far one of the Fanatic range which is the most improved in my eyes. So I'm going to do a few little bits, and his buttons and what have you I will do off screen. Then I'm going to get some matte white. This is another massively improved color. And a couple of coats of this. It's still going to need 2 coats at least. But I'm going to get in and base coat what's going to be the plasma coils for later. Although, depending on how well this goes on, gosh, that's covering better than I expected. Yeah. Now, given that plenty of time to dry, I've done a little bit of tidy up. He's ready for a shade. Now, what I've got, this is half and half speed paint medium, and this is strong skin shade, which is one of the new ones. It has appeared previously in the skin painting set, but it's going to be coming along with the Fanatic range individually too. I've thinned it out because I just like how the thin shades flow. Isn't that nice? I'm going to go over the entire miniature, and after giving it a couple of seconds to settle, if it pulls and collects in any big ways like this on his jacket, I will guide it out just to stop from getting big blodges at the bottom of them. So let's come back, get a look at what this looks like. Part of the reason I'm using the skin tone is that thinned out like this, it behaves very much like the various marine juice mixes that I've made in the past, but in 1 or 2 bottles, rather than having to mix up 3 or 4 different things. I like it a lot. Now in true Army Painter style of base coat and then a shade, that has come out super well. There is one bit here where I blorped maybe a little bit too much in the recesses, and I put them on a radiator to dry, so it dried way too quickly rather than running naturally, and that's on me. But the end result there, man, an army like that, I would put him on the table happy as. Last thing I'm going to do is to get a little bit of speed paint. This is Nuclear Sunrise, which I struggled to make sure I was going to say correctly. I'm just going to blast this over his plasma coils. Now, some will point out that if it's a plasma weapon, these should be copper. I will point out that it is a futuristic space gun, and I'm going to paint it orange because I want something warm on this miniature. Now, just while that dries, there is something else I wanted to point out about the bottles themselves. This isn't the paint, this is just a wonderful little quality of life thing that I really like. So on the bottle here, we've got deep green and then this 6 column marker here. Now they've called these triads with 6 paints, and that's what it bothers me because triad 3 with 6, but anyhow, the end result is still something really quite magnificent because what I've got in my other hand is green skin, and this is another in the deep greens range, and you'll see deep green at the lowest and then say 2 markers up. We can be pretty sure that this would make a fairly good highlight for this darker green. So it takes some of the fuss out of trying to choose highlight colors. I mix quite a lot of my highlights anyway, but if you are just someone who's getting started or you really want the ease of use of the same as the Citadel range where there is a mid-tone, a base, and a highlight, Army Painter's taken the guesswork out of it for you. So that's nice. I just think that's neat. So I am going to get a little bit of green skin, and same as with most of my highlights, I have added just a tiny touch more water into this than I might ordinarily. The idea being that it will flow more easily from my brush. Once I've got my camera sitting still, I will very gently dot that and get some highlight on the edge there. Yeah, that's not too bad. So use the edge of my brush, I think, rather than trying to paint with the tip. And get a little bit of green along, there we go, the edges of the armor plates. Let's come back in a second once I've done this. Now once it dries, the green skin does settle down a little bit, and that looks pretty cool. That's a safe bet. I might try in the future using the color that's directly next to the angel green, whichever one that turns out to be, but I think that looks rather nifty. What I am going to do now is grab just a few of those other colors, and I'm going to do a few highlights here and there. A little bit of white on the coils, maybe a bit of gray on the gun. I'm just going to have some fun painting, and we'll come back in a minute or so once I've done that. Now without getting too deep in the weeds onto highlighting them, what I'm going to do is quickly bop them with a matte varnish. The shades, so the washes rather, and some of these colors do dry with a very slight satiny sheen to them. Some folks don't like that. It's true of Agrax Earthshade and some Citadel paints as well, but the solution is right there, and I say it all the time. Matte varnish. It is the easiest solution in the world. So I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to hit him with his base and get a look at him once he's all done. And there at last is my dude. I've gone ahead and given him a little bit of gloss varnish on the plasma coils there, and I quite like how that's turned out. Army of him would look cool as. I'm really pleased with how those colors went on. In particular, the green skin on that angel green worked a lot better than I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be much too bright, but it seems like 2 steps up. That works quite well. Anyhow, we're going to pop them up with the others, and let's get a look at the whole group all together again. And so, all together again, there is the collection of stuff that I've been painting using just the Army Painter paints. And they're so cool. just to summarize again real quick, the main differences are that they are easier to mix, they have a much better flow property to them, and like I said, it's hard to quantify, but they are nicer to paint with. So a lot of big pluses there. I think if you've ever been put off the Army Painter before, maybe give one or two colors a chance. Something that you're likely to use a lot of, so maybe something like leather brown or a couple of skin tones, rather than diving all in on a set. You don't have to get an entire range to get a feel for how it looks. So I am quite happy with those results. And once again, thank you very much to the Army Painter for letting me have that box of paints. I've really enjoyed just grabbing stuff at random and painting it for no reason other than to have a play with some colors. I really enjoyed, I think the Sand Trooper, the Coastal Defense Stormtrooper, might have been my favorite to do because he was so quick. But yeah, thoroughly recommend. I would recommend them now without reservation, whereas previously people have asked, oh, what should I buy to get started painting? A lot of the time there would be well, you can start with Army Painter, but with one or two of those little caveats. And I just think that the improvements that the Fanatic range has introduced, they deal with pretty much everything that I've had an issue with in the past. If you don't like that resinous texture that the Army Painter paints do have, you're not going to like the Fanatic range. It is an incremental improvement on their own brand, their own line, so that hasn't changed, but the paints themselves, yes. Oh my goodness, much better. So hopefully, folks, something there was interesting to you. Any questions or anything, you can drop them down below. I will try and answer. Like I said, this is not really a how I paint things as much as a review for a change. And yeah, you folks all enjoy the rest of your day.